evening, everybody, and thank you very much indeed for cramming into this small but elegant space. We have a really remarkable lineup here tonight because, in a sense, we're doing something that the Baker Commission recommended, which was that there should be a degree of engagement between the United States and at least one of the participants here tonight. I'm afraid we don't have the other, but nevertheless, we have a formidable array. Let me just start from the far end. Patrick Coburn, the Middle East correspondent for The Independent, who's come here especially from his holiday in Ireland. And next to him is David Johnson, who's Deputy Chief of Mission at the US Embassy here in London. I'm very grateful to him for coming. The Iraqi ambassador, Dr. Salah al-Sheikli, is here, right here next to me. And on my other side, the man with whom the Baker Commission said there should be a little bit of engagement, the Syrian ambassador, Dr. Sami Kayani, and then finally Richard Beeston, diplomatic editor of The Times. I have just come fresh from Channel 4 News, where I had the great pleasure of interviewing Mr. John Bolton, who stated that democracy was not one of the strategic interests in America's endeavor in Iraq, which was interesting to learn, Ambassador, because that surely was one of the reasons why everybody wanted rid of Saddam Hussein.
Well, this is quite correct. If I may first welcome everybody in this hall. I'm delighted. I've never faced such a crowd since my days at the LSE, so I feel quite at home. And this is some 40 years ago. No, democracy was one of the aims. In fact, we who are now in government, we used to be pre-2003 in opposition. And this is really the one reason we wanted to get rid of the regime, is we wanted to restore democracy to Iraq. We had started on the right footing, but unfortunately military coups, juntas and dictators had diverted the whole march of what we were aspiring for. The killing field began to get beyond the Iraqis' bearing. It's rather unfortunate that perhaps when a gentleman like Mr. Bolton says a thing like this, and every single piece of literature that we had issued in the past, and even the coalition had issued in the past, is the aim of the whole change was democracy.
Well, I just wanted to clear that up, and because the reason we're here today.
Could I interrupt?
By all means.
I think it's important to understand that John Bolton, for all his talents, is what is classified as a private citizen in the United States, and I'm like all 300 million of them are entitled to express themselves as they see fit. But he doesn't express the views of the government, and the President very clearly stated last night that his objective was, and certainly remains, supporting a democratic Iraq, and I don't think there's any question about that.
Well, now, since this meeting was planned, which was really, in a sense, to review the Baker Commission recommendations, the Iraq Study Group, of course, an enormous amount has gone under the bridge, not least last night's statement from the President about the changes that are to come. And perhaps a useful place to start might be with you, because Baker suggested that there should be an engagement with Syria, and that perhaps Syria and Iran could be brought into the mix to somehow quell the terrible violence that's going on inside the country. Are you ready for engagement? Could you accept unconditional engagement?
Well, I don't know what you call unconditional engagement. If engagement means respect of the Iraqi people, what the Iraqis want, which was not done until now, Abu Ghraib is an example. If engagement means re-education of the superpower, because when America is bound to rule the world, it is in full control of the technology. So we cannot imagine America not ruling the world. However, when you want to rule the world, you have to understand it. You have to be aware of the needs of each people. This means that Americans need re-education. And this we see in every kingdom in the world. When there is a hire, when there is a young prince who is bound to become a king, his father or his family or his teacher educate him. And the Americans, when they tackled Iraq, they seemed a little bit to deal with cattle and not with people, unfortunately. So engaging with an Iraqi people which we love, which we respect, a cradle of civilization like the people of Syria, is something we really enjoy. And the respect of America as a superpower, as a valiant and intelligent people and state, of course, we do welcome that. But this is really the only condition to it, is really a good understanding of the Iraqi requirements. Unfortunately, up till now, we are setting the rules, and maybe these rules are not good for Iraq, and then some people are asking us to engage. Now, we would like to set new rules of the game and say to the Americans, this is what you need to do. This is better for America and better for Iraq and better for Syria.
But isn't it better to set those new rules once you've sat down and agreed to engage?
Absolutely. So and we have always the channels of dialogue. Of course, the channels of dialogue with America. We can't even afford to refuse.
Well, let's just ask our American embassy representative, David Johnson, what would you need from the Syrians to sit down and engage them?
Well, I think one of the recommendations, of course, of the commission was some sort of international engagement, including Syria and Iran. But the premise of that was that we had some sort of lack of understanding, and that if we were to sit down, there would be all of a sudden Syria and Iraq would find it in their interest to not seek to destabilize Iraq, but to seek to operate in community and stabilize it. I think that that unfortunately ignores the exchanges over quite a lengthy period of time to try to get that message across to Syria. And the question that arises in our mind is what does Syria want to act in its own interest in a stable neighbor? Is it looking for a changed environment in Lebanon? Is it looking for a suppression of the Hariri assassination panel at the UN? Is there an issue there outside of the context that they're looking for that has something to do with the interests of another country?
Well, just let's try. He's saying no conditions. He's happy to sit down unconditionally. But what are the conditions you are setting down?
Well, I'm not in a position to set down conditions, but the question arises as to what is the lack of clarity about what is anticipated or expected or hoped for.
But in a sense, you find that out if you sat down and asked them.
Well, it's about a relationship between Iraq and Syria, and Iraq and Syria are engaging. So what question would we bring to the fore that we've not already made clear to Syria?
What about being the man in the middle?
The least concerned.
We really we seem to be the victim between sort of what the United States wants and what the Syrians can offer. Unfortunately, so far, the Syrians have not proven any goodwill towards the present Iraqi government. Our security forces, our foreign minister, and indeed, he has a multitude of files, hundreds of them, of issues which is still pending between Syria and Iraq, and basically these are security issues. We have hundreds of people crossing the Syrian border. Initially, as you may recall, Ambassador, there was a commission, joint commission between Iraqis, Syrians, and Americans that went up the wall. We attempted a number of times to reinstate that commission. Again, this didn't work. We would really like the Syrians to feel at ease. Time and again, Syria was assured that there is no attempt by anybody to unsettle the Syrian regime. I think
your key plea with him is to stop insurgents coming across the border. Is that a possibility?
Well, what I claim is that the Syrian borders happen to be the most secure border in the neighboring Iraq. I think that there are more infiltrators from all other borders than from the Syrian border. And I do think that there are intelligence forces that have infiltrated Al-Qaeda, and the Syrian intelligence is not one of them. Unfortunately, what we see is operations in Iraq. Have you ever seen, ladies and gentlemen, a suicide bomber percuting an American vehicle? I have only seen a suicide bomber killing children and women around a school or in a souk, which is a market. I have never seen a suicide bomber killing occupation forces. How come? Doesn't Mr. Qaeda, who is a suicide bomber, goes faster to heavens if he kills a non-Muslim? In principle, he should be happy about it. And he should really hope to go to heavens the easiest way possible. How come he is only aiming small, young Muslim children and women and killing them? Who is infiltrating this Al-Qaeda? So I do not consider that the matter of the border. However, I do consider that in case a sort of national reconciliation begins, we do believe in the political process in Iraq. We have done everything to ensure the Iraqis that we will help them in any way possible in their political process. But we believe that once they define a sort of reconciliation process in Iraq and a timetable for the occupation forces to leave, then it is very easy for the neighboring countries of Iraq to help Iraq in training its army, in securing its borders, in helping the political process in it.
Right.
One thing is very important, Mr. Snow. Americans must be convinced that the best way for Iraq to live happily in the future is to leave it alone.
Well, I think you may have seen something about the difficulty of the dialogue here. We have an individual who ignores that they constantly allow people to come in through their airports who might have terrorist ideas in mind, never screen them out, never bother to do so, even though it affects their neighbors. And when a suggestion comes up that that might be an issue, they start conjuring up different ideas about who the target of these suicide bombers would be. I would invite him to the Metropolitan Police Department sometime to see some of the films they have of who these people have attacked. And the notion that he threw out is while it is tragic and it has happened, it's not consistent with the facts in a total form. And it's the type of idea that probably illustrates as best that one can in a forum like this how interesting what he might call a dialogue would be, how we would kind of have these images thrown up and then we would walk away without having the stability brought that one would assume that a neighbor would want in his border.
Well, in a sense, quite by chance, almost like falling off the back of a lorry, we have kind of set out a little of the difficulty which exists in the core of the problem. And now I want to bring in our two wings, our observers, our raconteurs, our people who go there and who have a chance to develop a bit of an overview. Patrick, I mean, first of all, how do you see the recommendations of the Baker Commission, and indeed, how do you read the present?
Well, I think they got buried last night, didn't they? I mean, I think that they were buried last night. I mean, it was difficult to it was almost every aspect of the Baker Commission was refuted. And the idea that there should be talks with Iran and Syria, that basically we should try and talk to the different players in Iraq, seems to be out the window. I mean, I think this is a disaster. I think that the one lesson of Iraq is that you can never eliminate any of the players. The idea that you can go after Muqtada al-Sadr and the Mahdi army. Well, Saddam went after the Sadr family, killed Muqtada's father and two brothers. This is a movement that's been... you're shaking your head, Sadr. You did. 1999.
Sorry, I mean, you probably know his father, Muhammad Sadiq al-Sadr.
Yeah,
but for a long time, Saddam left him alone because he was with the regime.
There could be a very long, complicated argument here, which would bore and confuse everybody, but I wouldn't accept that. But these social movements, political movements, can't be eliminated. You can't marginalize Iran and Syria, and if you try, you'll never have an agreement. That's what I find so depressing about what President Bush said last night. That I thought showed a complete misunderstanding and absolutely no learning curve since the invasion took place in 2003.
Richard.
Well, I was going to actually complain that I've been brought here slightly on false pretenses, because I actually sat through and read this the other day, and all 142 pages of it, and as Patrick suggested, it's basically been tossed in the bin. I think there was, on page 73, there was a very small reference to a surge of troops. It was a sort of passing reference. But seriously...
Suggesting it shouldn't happen.
It left it vague, but this wasn't among the 79 recommendations, that's for sure. Just a couple of points I'd like to make. First of all, I think we need a slight reality check when we talk about engaging with Syria and Iran. The reason it's difficult to engage with them is that early on the Americans basically identified them as the enemy. They made it very clear that if everything went swimmingly in Iraq, they would be next. If you ask people who you were threatening not so long ago to help you dig yourself out of the hole you've got yourself into, then you'd better come up with something fairly attractive to make them help you. And in the case of Syria, I think everyone recognizes that they would like some concessions on Lebanon and the difficulties that are happening there.
They would like the concession of Lebanon, wouldn't they?
They would like the concession of Lebanon, which the Americans, in fact, gave them after the last war. That was the...
So been there, done that, shouldn't do it again?
No, I'm just saying that is the concession they would like. And as you mentioned, the Hariri investigation, they would like the pressure on that.
One of the concessions would be to hand over to the investigation commission the aerial photos the American have, which identify exactly the scene of the murder, hours before, hours after, and during.
I'm sure
this will help the investigation commission and not Syria.
Yeah. Anyway. And with the Iranians, it's clearly their nuclear program, which they're now subject of international sanctions for. So I don't think you can take these things in isolation. These are all linked up, and if you want to get the Syrians involved, you are going to have to offer them concessions. And this is the way diplomacy happens. People aren't going to do things because they suddenly decide they like you. What I find interesting about the Iraq study group and what happened last night is we spend a lot of time trying to analyze what's going on in Iraq, and it's difficult and it's dangerous and it's complicated. But actually I discovered yesterday that we don't really understand what's going on in America very well. I had assumed that after the midterm elections, when Congress was captured, both houses of Congress were taken over by the Democrats, and this report came out from a confidant of the Bush family and the elder statesman of the foreign policy making process, made these perfectly reasonable recommendations for a way out strategy, that would be the deal. And as we now are discussing this evening, it's meaningless. And instead we're having an increase in US forces going in, and a last shot, last throw of the dice. And I personally, and I think probably many people in this country, have yet again misunderstood Bush and what he stands for and what he's about, not only his tenacity and stubbornness, if you like, but also his ideology. He molds himself on Ronald Reagan. I remember well when the US lost 250 Marines one morning in Beirut, in sort of not dissimilar circumstances. Reagan was pragmatic enough to say, let's get the hell out of here. And it's extraordinary to see the Americans actually throwing one last throw of the dice in this tremendous gamble. And I don't think anyone would disagree that the stakes are hugely high, and how this comes out is going to affect really what happens in the Middle East for a long time to come.
Just a tiny point, John. It is just as you say, dangerous. It's not. One tends to think of sort of danger in the long term, medium term, but today we have the news that U.S. forces suddenly assaulted the Iranian office in Arbil, in northern Iraq, in Kurdistan. According to the Kurds, they weren't asked. Masoud Barzani wasn't asked. This happened just like that. Some American officer, some American official decided to do this, an incredibly dangerous thing to do. Next time, this might be an Iranian vessel in the Gulf. Maybe this time there won't be repercussions, but next time there will. So actually, one tends to think of this sort of talk and sort of as if these cliffs were quite a long way off, and we're quite a long way from falling over them. But actually, we're pretty close, I think, going by what happened today.
David, do you want to react?
Well, I think that perhaps Richard's correct in that he does misunderstand the United States political system. We don't have a parliamentary democracy, and sometimes that's a difficult thing to grasp when we have elections which look like a parliament and they don't change the government. But the president has 2 more years in office. He has very strong powers as commander-in-chief and certainly in the foreign policy arena. He's also got the responsibility that goes with it, and made the decisions which were announced last night, the ones to reinforce not the same policy, but to make policy shifts as to how the military would be used, to do so in collaboration with the Iraqi government and actually in a team and partnership with them. So I think that what you see, while it might not be expected from a European point of view, is certainly quite consistent with the way the American government has been led. And the notion that even though these elder statesmen might be somehow connected to the president's father, and that be, I suppose in the Syrian context, when things are handed down from father to son to ophthalmologist, then that's the sort of thing that's done. But in our country, there are elections which take place, and so
It happened though with the Bush family.
Well, and there will be another election in 2 years, and someone else will succeed to the presidency. But he is the executive leader of our country and has been reelected with a significant majority.
But what about the point that both our observers have made, which is that it's very, very difficult to resolve anything in Iraq, and history tells us this repeatedly, without including a dialogue with the neighbours. And that is what Baker recommended above and beyond anything else. It was his first recommendation.
Well, if I could take some issue with your interpretation of the report, he was very clear, as was Congressman Hamilton, that one had to take all 79 of them and implement all 79. I could only view that as unrealistic, and so interpreted that as meaning, don't tell us that you are implementing our report and use that as your political cover for your political decisions, the one that you have to make as leader of the government. Don't do it as an a la carte and then give us the political responsibility for it. I think they fully expected the president to consult other people, to consult his own advisors, and to make the kind of choices that he in our system is responsible for making.
But you're a seasoned foreign service operative, and you understand diplomacy, and nobody, not even George Bush, believes that the military solution can ever deliver Iraq. He accepts its politics and its diplomacy, and there's no diplomacy.
Well, he accepts clearly that there's not a military solution. In the speech that he made last night, the proposals that he made are an integrated effort. But I don't think that he accepts, and I don't think a reasonable observer would, that the absence of a stable Iraq is due to an absence of American dialogue with the two neighbors. I think that if one were to follow absolutely the logic of what Richard was describing, then if one were to allow and encourage Iran to develop a nuclear arsenal and allow and encourage a greater Syria, which has a suzerainty, if not a sovereignty, over Lebanon, and that be the price to pay, that's not a price we really think is appropriate here. We think that all of the neighbors of Iraq and Iraq itself have the opportunity to live in a peaceful world, but they've got to seize that opportunity.
Patrick.
I'm surprised you haven't, or the ambassador from Syria hasn't mentioned one example of a recent Syrian-American cooperation. Last time I was in this room, this hall, I was listening to an excellent talk by Stephen Gray, the former head of the Sunday Times Insight team, who's written a book on rendition, which has some very interesting chapter on how American prisoners taken by America were sent to Damascus for 2 years after 2001, where they alleged that they were savagely tortured as part of the rendition program. This seems to be very fully supported by the evidence. So I think that making moral points about Lebanon, that one has to also factor in these other examples of US-Syrian cooperation.
Can I...
Shall I go into something a bit more constructive after all?
Well, that seems a neat evasion of the point he's just made, Ambassador. But that's what you're paid for.
No, I guess this story has been a bit amplified. In fact, America has many other places to send people to get tortured. One of them, maybe the UK, we never know. Could well be. In fact, they are in control of the whole world. So it doesn't matter where they send people to get tortured. They must be re-educated not to torture people. And therefore, they would educate us since they are ruling us. But can I throw a few political ideas?
Yes. Not too long.
No, not too long. We are talking here about dialogue concerning Iraq. Why don't we set a little bit the objectives? And I'm sure the Iraqi ambassador would agree with some or all of them. Everybody in the neighboring countries, and especially in the Arab world, are looking at an independent Iraq. In order to reach an independent Iraq, we should set a timetable for the occupation forces to leave and not leave a vacuum, a security vacuum. Therefore, they have to leave according to a timetable, but ensure that there is training of the Iraqi army. Second, we should abolish the famous Bremer law of dissolution of the Iraqi army. The Iraqi army did not belong to Mr. Saddam Hussein. It belonged to the Iraqi people. And many of the soldiers and officers of the Iraqi army were very competent officers. Among them were a majority maybe of Shias, a minority of Sunnis, or vice versa. I don't even know. We are starting to learn about what is really the difference between a Shia and a Sunni, since the Americans have given us the opportunity to learn that. And to call
We've
back...
already got the embassy shaking heads very, very significantly. So
Well,
I'll mark this.
We will arrange an agreement later. And then we should set that the new allegiance in this Iraqi army is to Iraq, and not to Sunnis, the Sunni community, or to the Shia community, or to the Kurdish community, or to the Yazidi community, whatever. Syrian, etc. Now, certainly we should also look for an objective for a united Iraq. So we should review the constitution. Iraqis, of course, if they want a united Iraq, they should review their constitution in the aim of reinforcing unity. And when they want to create a sort of federal state, they would create a federal state on economic basis, on geographic basis, and not on confessional or religious belonging or whatever we are trying to learn right now. We should find a solution for Kirkuk in order to serve all Iraqis. We should find a way to distribute the whole income. And I'm just trying to throw ideas that Iraqis may think about. Now, there should be afterwards a conference of national reconciliation where the neighboring countries would help. Later, when everybody does his homework, there should be an international conference where the world community will try to help Iraq a little bit recover some of the health the occupation has caused it to completely lose. And basically it is a rich country. It is, ladies and gentlemen, the single Arab country, the one Arab country, that has money and people. Some Arab countries have people, they don't have money. Some other Arab countries have money and they don't have people. Iraq happens to be the only Arab country that has the cadre. What is the cadre in English? Competences, human resources, and at the same time it has money.
Right, Ambassador, I want to stop you there because it seems to me that there is nothing that the Ambassador has said that you would disagree with beyond the fact that unfortunately it's been uttered by a Syrian ambassador? All these recommendations I could have read in a White House handout.
In the sense that it's up to the Iraqi ambassador to make those sort of determinations for his own country and not for others to impose them on him.
No, but those are
If I may, actually, as if I know His Excellency the Syrian ambassador was traveling today, so he didn't have much chance to go through the text of President Bush's speech, which I have a ready copy for him here. In fact, every single thing that he said, it is in the speech, oddly enough, which is, I regard very, very constructive. However, I feel that, we address Iraq without actually knowing what Iraq is. We don't know, for example, that this country, who was created in 1921, and well, there are no British here, not from the Foreign Office at least. They brought us a gentleman from Syria, from Saudi Arabia via Syria. Again, we have Syria featuring right early in the Syrians didn't like him, so we had to put up with him. So we had the monarchy. For 83 years, Iraq lived without this problem of Shi'is and Sunnis and Kurds. Kurds and Arabs were together fighting vertically the government, every single government that came to power. Because of the lack of democracy, we had to fight. 1958, we changed from monarchy to republican. I don't recall, most Iraqis in this hall, and there are very few of them, don't recall we ever quarreled with each other because our neighbor was Sunnis, Shiis, Kurds, Christians, or whatever. Ever.
Please repeat that.
No, no. I mean, this is true.
People have really to understand it.
Because there isn't a single family in Iraq who's not of mixed composition. Each single family, we intermarried to Kurds, to Shi'is, to Sunnis. And this thing really is not Iraqi grown. It has come, it was created. You cannot find, prior to 2003, a single Iraqi writer talking about Shi'ism or Sunnism or the distinction. Now, many of you in this hall probably think the Ba'ath Party is Sunni. Wrong. The Ba'ath Party was created by Shia scholars, and the majority of civilians in the Ba'ath Party are Shiite, not Sunnis.
And by a Christian at the answer.
Well, in Iraq was created in Najaf and in Nasiriyah.
There's disagreement from the audience down there. Do you want to
enter
a qualification now?
Indeed.
Let's get a microphone to the second row back there.
I think it's supposed to be new. Michel Aflaq, who founded the Ba'ath Party.
The Ba'ath Party was founded in Syria. But when it came to Iraq, those who took it up were Shiite from Najaf and from Nasiriyah. Our first Secretary General, and the Ba'ath Party first Secretary General, was Rikabi, is a Shi'i, who was the first youngest minister, who was a minister of reconstruction, oddly enough, of all things, in 1958. And the head of the Commission of De-Baathification, Dr. Chalabi, he said in an interview with the Sharq al-Awsat that, yes, they discovered that the majority of the people they have de-Baathified were Shi'is, not Sunnis. So really, this is a creation that came from abroad. We, for example, as Iraqi people, Arabs and Kurds have fought together against each single regime. The Iraqi army, yes, was sent to crush the Kurds, but they did it because they were ordered to do it, and because the army, the dictatorship behind it was such that it quelled anything that rose to grab power from Saddam and his cronies. So
Can I
now,
a bit of that?
So
Now,
now,
quickly challenge a couple of elements of that. The Kurds in 1988 were gassed in their thousands and murdered and killed because they were Kurds. Wasn't anything else. There was no other reason to attack them other than Saddam wanted to teach them a lesson. The Shias, if you go to any large Shia town in southern Iraq, there will be a large mass grave outside the town. Most of the people in those mass graves were rounded up and shot in 1991 because they happened to be Shia. Some of them were rebelling against the state, others weren't. It didn't really matter. I met somebody who actually survived it and was buried with the bodies and emerged, and he told me, how he was just picked up off the street. And I think that when we come to investigate the problems of modern-day Iraq, many of them can be traced to that period when, as you absolutely rightly say, most Iraqis living in Baghdad, the differences didn't really make much difference. But during that 10 years, the last 10 years of Saddam's rule, if you were a Shia living in Sadr City, then Saddam City, you damn well knew you were a Shia and you were a second-class citizen. Or if you lived in the south, you would have a relative who was killed. Or if you were a Kurd living in the north, you'd survived. You were very, and I think that's where we can really start to trace the sectarian and ethnic differences that we're dealing with now.
Sorry, Saddam killed on perception rather than on people who actually committed something against him or against the state. I don't know, many of you probably don't know the story who Saddam told to Prince Bandar Prince Sultan. He said, is it true, Mr. President, that you look at somebody's eyes and if you don't like it, you kill them? He said, yes. So why do you do that? He said, I'd rather kill him and rather than leave him, and then I'll be right, and then later on he would kill me. This is what Saddam's personality was like. So he, the chap sitting in front of me, myself, my cousin was executed, and the fourth sort of generation of the family were uprooted from the government offices, schools, universities, and we were turfed out. And I don't think I'm,
Well, what was it about, if we pursue your thesis, what was it about 2003? Who was responsible for religiousizing the divides?
Well, honestly, I haven't really. This is one of the projects I'm going to take up when I retire. But I haven't really looked at it, but it's definitely, it appealed to some people. It doesn't appeal to many Iraqis. And, you have a huge sector of Shiite who actually do not subscribe to the present understanding of the sectarian divide. And this is where I think what is happening in yesterday's strategy paper document by President Bush is they trying to once again to re-amalgamate the Iraqi society by trying to prevent any further escalation of sectarian divide.
I agree with Richard. I first went to Iraq in 1978. I'd just come from Lebanon where the civil war had been raging, and before that I'd been in Belfast for 3 years. And I always felt decent Iraqis, completely deceived themselves on the degree of ethnic and sectarian differences within the country. People would often say to you, oh, my sister is married to a Sunni if they were Shia and so forth. But first of all, they always knew exactly what religion people subscribed to. Exactly like we used to in Belfast. People would often say to me in Belfast, I don't care if somebody's a Protestant. There's my friend over there, lives in number 22. He's a Protestant, and do you see that guy over there? Yeah, he's a Protestant, great friend of mine, And you got the message pretty fast that the divisions are very deep. And actually, recently in 2005, there were 2 elections in Iraq. How did Iraqis vote? They voted along sectarian or ethnic lines, as Sunni, Shia, or Kurds. Now, one could, I think, say, when you have an occupation, on which different communities take different sides, this automatically increases sectarianism. Because previously, you might have had a Sunni who has maybe been in the army is dissolved. You have a Shia who has become a new policeman. Previously, he might have seen the Shia as a member of a different community. But now, if there's a war going, if there's an occupation, he sees him as a traitor. So in addition to quite deep, and I'd say deeper, sectarian ethnic differences than you believe, that you have the people taking different sides towards a foreign occupation. And that has always in history created incredible animosities.
Just a short intervention, John. You did ask me, who do you think instituted this difference and brought it in? I would say Western intellectuals and journalists and those who actually try to read things into things which really doesn't exist.
But this is more than reading. This is life and death. I mean, I was in there just before Christmas. I'm in the chair, so I'm not going to be partisan, of course. But just before Christmas, I ran into a journalist who I knew when I was in Iraq in the late 80s. He was a Ba'athist because you had to be, because he wouldn't have a job on a newspaper if he wasn't a Ba'athist. Then he had to renounce his Ba'athism, and he remained more or less simply an Iraqi. Today, he's a Shia. He has to declare himself to be a Shia. He doesn't go to the mosque, never has done. His family is not religious. But he is known to be Shia by the Sunnis who live in the block next to him. And he now cannot go to work. He can't cross the Sunni area. The bus doesn't go that way anymore. His daughter doesn't go to school anymore. And this is not about me as a Western intellectual, which I'm not, misreading the situation. It's because he's going to die if he walks across that particular block. And in the meantime, the sewers have broken down, the water supply is gone, and he's been reduced from a bourgeois Ba'athist to a scrubber.
John, thank you. I think you have to know that whether you are a this is Ali Al-Bayati. I'm the counselor of the Iraqi embassy in London. I am an Iraqi. I belong. Al-Bayati is a well-known tribe as a Sunni tribe. My leader is a Sunni, but I am a Shiite. My brother is married to a Sunni, okay, and my grandfather was married to a Sunni. So, although he had more than one wife.
Well, you are a true Iraqi.
But I think you have to know that whether you are a Shia or a Sunni in Iraq or a Kurd, you have a political agenda. And what you see in Iraq, everybody is juggling for power. It's power what they are after. It's not Shiism or Sunnism. If you are a Sunni and you get a good place in the government, then you support the government, whether it is. Now, the main division came, it's by the previous regime supporters and Al-Qaeda who came from outside. It is them who start saying, we are killing the infidels. Who are the infidels? The Shia and the Kurd. And they start coming from the west of Iraq. I don't care what everybody says, but that is a hard fact. They were coming from the west of Iraq. They were coming from different countries, Saudis, Sudanese, Egyptian. Regardless, they are young people. They are brainwashed. If you kill this, if you kill that, then you go.
But even the Americans' own figures suggest it's a tiny, tiny minority of the trouble is caused by anybody from outside. The biggest problem was surely that army that was simply dispossessed. What would you do if you had all the weapons taken?
When the regime fall down, when you have a regime for 35 years infiltrating every single part of your life, there is a lot of people who lost power and lost prosperity and way of life. And it is those people who are driving everybody else. And when you are a young kid, you don't have a job at the age of 17 and 18. Anybody who gives you $500, you'll do what they want you to do. And that's what's happening. It is not from Iraq. And when Patrick said that the Iraqis were deluding themselves whether they are Sunnis or Shias, they are not. They belong to it, but that has been driving inside Iraq from people from outside is not an Iraqi at all.
Yeah, this is the last from the panel before we open it up to everybody. Yeah.
Yes, although I am not an expert in Iraq, but I'm certainly closer to Iraqis than Mr. Bolton. And I understand that Iraq has been governed, Mr. Bayati, by the central region since Babylon, since the times of Babylon.
Babylon is in the south of Iraq.
No, it's not in the south. Babylon, the central region of Iraq is between Amara, Najaf, and Mosul. Now, it includes Sunnis, Shias, Kurds, etc. But basically, this central region has ruled Iraq nearly for the last 5,000 years, a bit before America was born. Now, this means that basically you cannot deal in Iraq in a new democracy in a way that you allocate a vote for each citizen. This is not a true democracy, because you allocate a vote for each citizen when you have a uniform people. But when you have 80% of the administrators, of the military, of the engineers, of the doctors, of the street cleaners, of anybody who has a profession coming from the central region, then in order to make the country uniform, you need time. And therefore there should be a better weighing of representation in Iraq. And this, we have an example for that in Lebanon. A Shia vote in Lebanon is worth half of a Maronite vote. Did you know that?
I know that.
For example, you need 10,000 Shias in Lebanon in order to have the equivalent of 5,000 Maronites and of 7,000 or 8,000 Sunnis.
So a Shia is half a Sunni?
No, absolutely not. A central region man, be it a Shia, be it a Sunni, be it a Kurd, be it etc., should be dealt with differently a little bit in a transition period. And then once this transition period is over, then of course Iraq will reach a uniform democracy like advanced states. Even in the UK, sometimes we know that in some places, one vote is not the same as in other places. We know that because when you get equal votes in an election, you don't get an equal number of deputies.
You're talking about the proportional representation, that's what you're
Exactly.
saying.
Exactly.
But
Right.
one man, one vote.
The Syrian model.
Yes, this is what I meant.
Let's open it up. Now, there are microphones, and if you could please say who you are, then in the yellow. Let's start.
Hi, I'm from IB Toys Publishers. I just had a question for David Johnson. I wondered if you could comment on stories that have surfaced in Time magazine and also the London Daily Telegraph on the fact that saying that the US has been working in some cases in conjunction with Saudi Arabia to provide funds and in some cases arms to opponents of Hezbollah and also to the Syrian opposition. Is this the policy of the United States, not taking the sort of carrots approach of the Baker Report, but to actively oppose people who are part of the arc of extremism, so-called, in the Middle East?
I'm not familiar with the reports that you're quoting, nor do I know when they're alleged to have taken place. We are working with the governments in the region to provide for their legitimate defense needs, but I've got no knowledge that we're supporting any of the groups that you suggested that were reported by others.
Right at the back there. There's a microphone coming. Name, rank, and number.
Jonathan Waxman, no rank and many numbers, but a wonderful forum, so thank you very much to all the speakers. And this is a point and a question perhaps for the Syrian ambassador. There was a wonderful interview about a month ago between John Simpson and President Assad, in which President Assad, when asked, commented that he would welcome discussions with Lebanon, with Israel, indeed with America. Do you think this has been an ignored interview? Do you think that there's a point there that's been missed and should be followed through?
Well, I don't think it is really missed. I think people are still thinking. Usually people, when they think, they need time. When they kill, they don't need time. So I think that this opportunity is not really missed. I think that America is looking seriously at the offers done by Syria in order to achieve stability in the region. Of course, it takes time because, unfortunately, the neocons are still there in the American administration, and it's very hard to dislodge them. This is not to say that they are not intelligent enough. They are. They are not so intelligent in implementing their ideas. So basically, it will take time. I think that the Israeli government is so weak that ultimately it does not have the necessary courage to start a serious peace process, either with Syria or with any other, in fact, with any other force in the Middle East, starting with Hezbollah, by the way.
Thank you. Rada Karmi, I just want to, it's not so much a question really, I wanted to get back to the issue of sectarianism. This is very important, in fact, about whether the Iraqis had these differences amongst each other or not before, etc. Look, the whole of the Arab world is made up of people of different religions, and it's a very interesting thing about the Arab world. They're just like a mosaic. But you see, the main point is not whether there are these sectarian communities or sects or religious groups. That they exist. And people know that they know each other for being Christian or being Assyrian or whatever. The point is not that. The point is whether this leads to enmity or conflict or not. Now, the fact is that you can have sectarian differences in Britain if you have a situation in which there is a failure of central government, where there is some problem going on. People will divide along religious lines. It's something perfectly human. The issue is the fact, can you keep these things in check? Can you have a form of rule which makes them unimportant or not? And that's the problem with the American occupation. Because it has appeared, it has in fact made the situation, which was a natural situation, become one of conflict. Didn't create Shias and Sunnis, but it made them fight each other. That's why this occupation has to end and why it is so extremely dangerous.
Could I just make a quick response to that? Sure. I think one point I just wanted to illustrate, slightly taking on the last speaker's point, was that right now in the Middle East, the big fear is not that Iraq is going to get worse, although obviously many people are concerned about that, but that a much larger regional conflagration could erupt, one that would pit the Iranians and their Shia brethren in Iraq and Lebanon and elsewhere against the majority Arab Sunni population led by Saudi Arabia and Egypt and Jordan and other countries. And with Iran's ambitious nuclear program and with the tensions in the Gulf, particularly where I see the Americans have just deployed another carrier group, that is the big issue that is occupying leaders in the region's minds. And it would make what's happening in Iraq, should this conflagration actually happen, really seem like quite a small conflict by comparison. And it's something I'm not sure people are quite aware that this is really what Patrick was mentioning, that we're on this cliff. It's much, much closer than I think people realize.
I think. Can I make a small point just about sectarianism? Leave aside, and we disagree about the origins of this, but there shouldn't really be any doubt what's happening now. I mean, Baghdad has broken up. The mixed areas are no longer mixed. The minorities, Sunni or Shia, are running. You go to I was in Diyala, which is a province northeast of Baghdad, a few months ago. People are running everywhere. If they don't run, they get killed. So in the number of mixed areas is going down by the week, by the month. There won't be many left soon. So whatever the situation was in the past, this is the real fabric of Iraqi politics at the moment. And when I was a few months ago, about a year ago, in Baghdad, I have drivers. They're both two drivers. They're both Sunni. I made sure, got them IDs that removed any name, Othman or something like that, in their IDs would identify them as Sunni, because I knew exactly what would happen if they stop at a checkpoint, which is run by Shia, and they knew too. So whatever the situation in the past, there is total sectarian ethnic division at the moment.
I think rather put her hand right on the cause of what is happening in Iraq. The collapse of the central authority, the collapse of the Iraqi state as we knew it, is the main cause behind everything that's happening today.
With respect, she said the occupation was the...
No, the absence, she said the absence. The absence. I know I'm a bit, going in the caca in my old age, but I still, remember everybody's words. No, it's the absence of central authority, the collapse of the state of Iraq is the cause of what is happening at the present. And this is why, and I'm not promoting, I mean, we were wishing that President Bush said something that he did, is the reimposing a central authority by one way or another is the only way to stop this sectarian fight going on further and further. And the reason why people have sort of retreated to their, Patrick mentioned the election, and the reason why people have voted for Shiis, Sunnis and Kurds, because these are the only people who would protect them in the absence of a central authority. And this is, I know, just to support your argument, I know communists, Shiites, who voted for the alliance, and they didn't vote for the Communist Party, because in the old days the Communist Party used to be very strong and very authoritative. Now the alliance is very strong. So to protect himself, he voted that way. And really, this is why we got to reverse the process. Political parties in Iraq did not start on sectarian basis, even prior to 1942. After 1942, up to all political parties were started on ideologies.
I suppose that
my
name is Jared O'Connor. I'm a private citizen. My question kind of settles on the number. What you're discussing right now is, can the panel accept that we moved from an occupation scenario to one which is civil war, and that the lessons are likely to come from the Balkans and sectarian conflicts like that, rather than Vietnam, which has often been cited as America needing to learn lessons from there? Does the panel accept we are now in a civil war environment where the vast bulk of the violence is sectarian and has nothing to do with occupation or government?
Richard.
Absolutely. I mean, there's been a sort of argument of the semantics of the word civil war, and I suppose if you compared the situation in Bosnia or Lebanon, which I was familiar with, that you don't have yet uniformed different armies with territories carved out, but pretty well you have that. I mean, as Patrick said, there are identifiable areas in Baghdad now. We had a similar situation. We have two Shia drivers, and a few weeks ago they fled their home and showed up at our hotel with their families because they've been told it's given 24 hours to get out. And that's replicated again and again right across the residential areas of Baghdad. So if that is a civil war, and I think, in fact, President Bush pretty well acknowledged it last night. He said we're going in here to try and reverse the sectarian violence and to establish some order. Perhaps there will be a short-term, this will have a short-term impact on the ground, very possibly. But in the long term, it's a political process. And while you still have a government that's dominated by Shias who want to have a mandate to run the country, and you have a very broken up Sunni community without really leadership and representation, it's still embittered, still feels that its rights are being trampled over, I can't really see a political solution to Iraq's problems.
I'm going to take a couple of one, and then I'm coming to the ambassador. How's that? Yes.
Hi, yes. My name's Omar Shah. I just wanted to ask the panel to address a couple of issues that I don't think we've actually addressed yet, and they stem from perhaps the origin of the occupation, why America invaded Iraq in the first place. And, the stated aim was weapons of mass destruction. We didn't find any, even though perhaps America sold them some. So why did they go in? And, a number of theories have been circulating, and some of the more plausible ones are the fact that it was to secure supplies of oil, because perhaps Saudi Arabia was seen to be slipping out of US control.
I mean, with respect, in a way, I mean, I kind of accepted that it's happened. And the why is an interesting one, but we're really here to discuss the Baker Commission's suggestions as to how to get out.
Right, but then you have to know why to be able to solve it. Okay? And one of the other issues is, because of course the new petroleum law is also about to be passed in the Assembly, and the question then arises is, to going to the roots of the problem, which is the Arab-Israeli conflict, and which is also linked to the question of oil, because America needs to secure its oil supplies and has to have a stable Middle East in order to do that.
Right. Oil, and I'll take the next one here. I'm going to take two or three, and then... Yes, here, sorry.
It's Leonard Doyle from The Independent. I would just like to ask Ambassador Johnson why when the combined bipartisan wisdom of the United States, as epitomized in the Baker Commission report, which is what we're here to talk about, recommended discussion, engagement, and dialogue with Iran, who's not represented here tragically because they're the next one on the list, and Syria. How can we justify describing them as the enemy? How can we move from a bipartisan commission of such high caliber and so highly respected to simply just ripping it up and throwing it out the window and saying, well, we move on because that's not relevant anymore? How does that work?
While the microphone's going back to the woman with the hand in the air there, do you want to answer that, David?
Well, I think that the suggestions, the recommendations by the report were considered very carefully by the President. I think other recommendations were as well by the advisors that he has within the government, by the military. And he made the choices that he announced last night. Believes firmly that the Iranians and the Syrians have no doubt as to what sort of steps they could take for a stabilized area, what would be in their interest to do so. And they thus far have chosen not to. Doesn't believe that a sitting down at a table when there is already an understanding of what needs to be done would actually yield any benefit.
Patrick?
It's very noticeable, by the way, that the troops are going in. If the Iranians and the Syrians were the great threat and people coming across the border, do notice that the extra troops going in are not going to the Iranian border. They're going to Anbar or Baghdad. They're not going to the Syrian border. So if a flood of volunteers and weapons were coming across these borders, one would think that the American soldiers might be deployed there. So I think that's kind of an admission that that's not really true. I think actually one of the worst myths in the Middle East is that the Shia of Iraq or the Shia of Lebanon are cat's paws or pawns of the Syrians or the Iranians. There are other connections, yes. Is there influence? Yes. Is there some support? But basically these are powerful indigenous movements. And to oversimplify and imagine that somehow they're pawns all sort of controlled by somebody in Tehran is a gross and oversimplification, and one which may have tragic results for the whole Middle East, because it's not just the US that says this, it's the Sunni states. King Abdullah of Jordan says it, Mubarak in Egypt says it. This sort of paranoid fear and whipping up of fears within the Sunni states is one of the most sort of menacing things happening in the Middle East at the moment.
Ambassador.
Yes, thank you very much for a very obvious observation. For the gentleman there, I would like to beg you not to call us sectarian countries, because this is one of the rare regions in the world where a Christian can say that he has been a Christian for 2,000 years. And a Muslim can say, and a Shia can say that he has been a Shia for 1,400 years. And a Sunni can say the same. And a Kurd can say, I'm still Kurdish for thousands of years. And everybody else the same. While Europe has done the hegemonization in the Middle Ages, no Spaniard can tell you today that he is a Muslim or a Jew, because they were wiped out 500 years ago, hegemony. And when the French decided to get rid of the Protestants, who were the cream of the cream in France, in one night in Saint-Barthélemy, they were finished with about 1 million Protestants. So please let us not call the peoples of the Middle East sectarian peoples, because they happen to be the example of the tolerance of their beliefs, of their ethnies, etc. You see, when you have an occupation force that has entered the country and caused such a cleavage between communities, as Mrs. Karmi said, then we do not really call this a sectarian people. It is something that has been mounted altogether. On one hand, you have it's a catch-33 situation. Neocons, Qaeda, and some lunatics from the other side. So I don't think there will ever be a civil war in Iraq. I don't really think, especially if the occupation forces leave Iraq, I don't think there will ever be a civil war in Iraq. And I am really sure of that.
Is there any Iraqi who agrees with that? Any Iraqi
a second point that I would like, please, to point out to the audience. I would like to point out of the tragedy of the Iraqi refugees. The ambassador talked about the internal refugees inside Iraq. I would like to talk to you also about the 300,000 Christian Iraqis who are in Syria, the 400,000 Shia Iraqis who are in Syria, the 600,000 Sunni Iraqis who are in Syria, amounting altogether to some 1,3.4 Iraqi refugees. And Syria, instead of being helped to assist these brothers that are coming across the border, it is this way of the border, this direction, not the other direction. Instead of being helped, it is being threatened of sanctions all the time. So please remember the Iraqi refugees.
Right, there's a lot of hands, and I'm going to try and take 4 or 5 questions from the audience. Let's start with you, yes.
Hi, I'm Jane Kinnenmont from the Economist Intelligence Unit. My question relates actually to what Patrick said a moment ago, but I'd love to hear from all the panellists if that's possible. And my question is, given that most estimates agree that foreign fighters are a small minority of the insurgents in Iraq, how important really is this issue of border security? And the corollary of that is, even if there were to be an agreement between Syria and the US, how much would this actually contribute to stabilizing Iraq? Thank you.
Good. Border security. We'll note that. And then to the one just behind you there, yes.
Hi, thanks. I must say it's extraordinary to see such a concentration of intellectual capacity and political expertise, but also to see quite a lot of that spent on vindication of existing positions, refutation of opposing arguments, and historical causation rather than solutions to what is a horrendous problem. And something has been said about solutions, which has been very insightful, but in the absence of what seems to be the absence of strong multilateral capacity to actually address the conflict which is now occurring, do you think there really are prospects for successful resolution? Most of the effective peacemaking that's been done in recent times has been done under the auspices of the UN or other multilateral actors. Do you see any prospects for an enhanced role for the UN or other external players who might be able to address and bring about conflict resolution in a slightly different manner to what we've seen recently?
Conflict resolution, borders. Microphone over to the far corner here.
My name is Bayan Sami Abdurrahman. I'm the representative for the Kurdistan region in Iraq. I'm very interested to hear His Excellency the Ambassador for Syria explain how in Syria there are so many refugees from Iraq and how the Middle East is so peaceful. It's very interesting as a Kurd because the Kurds in Syria are heavily oppressed and suppressed, which actually takes me to
I don't think so.
I know so because I have relatives there.
I happen also to have relatives.
I would like to really make a point and ask the panel for their views. We, or the Baker-Hamilton report and others, have recommended engagement from Iraq's neighbours. Iraq's neighbours, I'm sorry to say, as much as we would love to have peace with our neighbours, are not at peace with themselves. We are surrounded by countries that are not democratic. Their human rights records are atrocious. They have caused tension and conflict around the world and within the region. How are we expected as Iraqis to welcome engagement from our neighbours when they have that record? We would like engagement, but we would like good neighbours, helpful neighbours. Thank you.
I'll pause in the questions for a moment. If you give it to the woman next to you with the pale blouse there, yeah. I'll come back to you in a moment and then to you. But let's just quickly, we've got 15 minutes left, and if anyone wants to take up these chairs that have become vacant, do feel free, as you've been standing a long time. But Ambassador, there are 3 points, but the one that's most germane to you is that you're a bad neighbour, because you oppress the Kurds, and that's true, isn't it?
Well, it's funny that I hear that, because all what I know is that 10% of the Damascus population is of Kurdish origin. And they are very proud of being very Damascene and very Kurd, and very lovable, in fact, and very nice to their Arab neighbors. And the type of Kurds that you're talking about, we know very little of them. In fact, many of the Kurds have crossed the borders from Turkey to Syria, about 300,000, and they were supported by their brother Kurds to cross the borders against Turkey, and we had to pay a high price for it. And many of the Kurds that are today in Iraq have Syrian passports. One of my diplomats here has been giving passports to President Talabani, who is a very good friend of Syria, for a long time. And I don't think you question that President Talabani is Kurdish. I think that this whole...
It's rather nice. This is going rather well. Shall we just get a quick response from our Kurdish friend?
Well, so many points there. I'm afraid I hate to disagree with you, Your Excellency, but I really do have to. Syria's record when it comes to human rights generally is not very good, particularly with the Kurdish community in Syria. I have relatives who live in Syria. And
I just wondered about the points he'd made. I mean, he is saying that he received 300,000... well, how many did you receive from Turkey?
Well,
30,000.
We keep on receiving people. I wish you could take people as immigrants.
Anyway, there seem to be people fleeing Turkey into Syria, and there seems also to be some practice in the embassy of supplying President Talabani with the Syrian passport.
If Syria was not a tolerant country, would Christians from Iraq, Shias from Iraq, Sunnis from Iraq, Kurds from Turkey, Kurds from Iraq come to Syria? If it is such an ugly place, if the number of detainees in Syria, which may amount, I don't even know their number, to 1,000, can you compare them to the tens and tens of thousands elsewhere, and even to many thousands in great Western democracies? I mean, what are we talking about here?
Well, listen, I think we've had a very good sort of kind of balanced
I
operation here.
didn't actually get to hear the panel's views on how should the people of Iraq welcome engagement from their neighbours when some of their neighbours, and I'm not particularly singling out Syria, to be honest, some of their neighbours, most of our neighbours actually, don't have a democratic record, have very little respect for human rights, have caused tension in the region themselves. How should we, as Iraqis, welcome that engagement? Is that engagement or is that interference?
Patrick, help us out.
Can I resolve? Well, of course, yeah. I agree with Bayan. I mean, what happens to Kurds in Syria, and I think that the idea that Kurds are pouring into Syria to take advantage of the enormous respect for human rights there is a bit naive. But I also, make another point. I think that in the present circumstances in Iraq, at the end of the day, it's such a big deal for Iran, Syria, for all the neighbours that they can afford to compromise in Iraq, but they can't afford to be defeated. Certainly the Iranians can't afford to be defeated. And that just won't happen, whatever Washington thinks. But I just want to make a small point about border crossing, because under Saddam, I crossed illegally into Iraq from both at different times from northeast Syria across the Tigris and also from Iran at a different time. And it is a very long border. Saddam was not a man who was particularly careful about who he shot crossing his borders, but at that time it was a very easy thing to do. So the idea that somehow the Syrian government or the Iranian government can close these enormous borders, which nobody has done historically, is really just out the window. It's not a feasible thing to do.
David, I wonder if you could take up the point that the Economist Intelligence Unit asked, which is about this whole business of border security, and it was amplified in a sense here because, Patrick stressed that the troops are not being deployed to the borders. The British are running out of things to do because they can't clean up Basra, so they could be on the border, but they're not. So what is it about borders?
Well, I think that to get to the question, the specific one that was raised, I don't think the border patrol, if you will, is a solution to all of the problems, but it's part of the solution to the problem. It's part of the solution to individuals as well as resources flowing in which fuel the sectarian violence. But I think in particular, controlling the airport as a way of ingress for individuals who are bent on destruction in Iraq and for the resources which support them would be a great contribution to stabilizing a neighbor, which if Syria is of a mind to think that stability is in its interest.
I would like to... What about him? Well, he's my boss. He is ruling the world.
You've always got a charming escape clause coming forward.
You see, I don't understand why...
You're not checking people at the airport, and there's a whole lot of unattractive baggage.
Every 2 months I receive a list of 300-400 names, which have reached something like 3,000 names. 4,000, maybe 5,000, I'm not sure really, I cannot give an exact figure. And that I will be glad to send even to the American Embassy. Why I'm not sending them to the American Embassy is that I don't want them to finish in Abu Ghraib for doing maybe nothing, I don't know, or in Guantanamo. But essentially, we have been catching so many people just for the possible intention of going to Iraq. This is why I do believe that the Syrian border happens to be the most secure. I cannot say it is full hermetic because nobody can.
That's a pretty desperate state of affairs, isn't it,
now,
David Johnson? Let's just pick up on this. This is a very important point you made. The Syrians do pick people up, but can't send them to you because they don't trust you to handle them properly. And my God, would you wish it on anyone to go to Guantanamo?
Well, Thank you for the applause. We're not asking the Syrians to turn them over to us or to turn them over to anyone else. We're asking them not to allow them into their country so that they can go further into Iraq. That's a fairly simple request. It's not a very complicated one. It has nothing to do with Guantanamo. It has to do with acting in a way which a neighbor would if it wished to promote stability in the region.
Are you holding these 3,000 at the moment?
Absolutely. Most of them, in fact, are sent back to their countries of origin. Many have gone back to Saudi Arabia, and we don't know what the Saudis are doing to them. Many of them are being sent back to Morocco, but we are not sending back anybody to America.
Right. Okay. Let's pick up. There's a question there, and then a question here, and then we're really going to be running out because we've got to finish. Yeah.
I'm just wondering. I know that people are doing. The U.S. is doing public works programs and what have you, but it seems to me that if you invest a lot more in putting, say, these foreign kids, you said $500 and they'll do anything. Why don't you give them $500 to clean up a school that's just been bombed, or or, people want security in their lives, and I think if more people are employed, that just seems like one obvious reason to clean up the mess and keep an incentive for people not to blow each other up.
Yeah. Probably just a quick point on that. I mean, actually, some of the proposals in Bush's speech last night covered that. And it's what's a shame is that it's really too little too late. If they'd gone into Iraq with that plan in mind, with the cash in the pocket, and let's concentrate on jobs, reconstruction, dividing up Baghdad into areas of competence, bringing it, if that had been the plan, but there wasn't one. And it's too late now. I mean, it's very, very difficult to administer anything because, as we've seen with the reconstruction program, all the people whose job it was to deliver it, US diplomats, DFID people, aid organizations, were killed or attacked and required so much security to conduct even the most basic reconstruction operation that it became prohibitively expensive, and 30% of all costs went on actually having security guards around you. What was rebuilt or done up was blown up. Schools were blown up. I mean, children who'd been handed lollipops by American soldiers were blown up. People didn't want to have anything to do with it. Even today, an interpreter working for a foreign media organization, if they find out that who you're working for, they'll cut your head off.
If I could just give you a little one insight, I stayed in a blockhouse.
Yes, but at some point you need that. Somebody somewhere has to deliver the money from A to B and have a plan, and you can't just fly a plane over and drop $20 bills over the city.
Just before Christmas, I was in a blockhouse in a secure area in Baghdad, and one of the other people staying with us in this secure place, protected by a very expensive private security firm, was a construction worker. And what he did was to go out and build police stations. And he was building police stations all over Baghdad, all over the central part of Iraq. And he described quite eloquently that what happened was that they would finish the police station, and within 3 weeks, the door fittings would have gone, the shower hoses would have gone, the windows would have gone, and in fact, within about a month and a half, the entire building would be reduced to a shell. And that is because the people living in that environment have nothing. They have no income, no job, and that door handle is actually a form of income, if you can get it and sell it. And so we're in a terrible meltdown situation, and reversing that, even with $1 billion, is not going to be easy. But I mean, I shouldn't be saying that because I'm in the chair. So I'm going to say you.
Okay, Tamer Al-Mishal, I'm from a Palestinian journalist. I totally agree with the Syrian ambassador about that the sectarian crisis has come to the Iraq and has come to the Middle East because of the occupation and because of the so-called the new liberators. And I want to be clear.
So why the Palestinians are fighting when they are all Sunnis? Why the Palestinians are fighting between each other when they are all Sunnis?
This is different. This is different. Let me continue, please. This is different thing. I'm just, whatever, I want to give such a good example, a recent example to our friend, the Iraqi ambassador. And we have lots of criticism about Saddam Hussein's policy against Iraqis, and we disagree about that. But the killing of Saddam Hussein in the first day of the feast, and this atmosphere in the court against him, do you think this is a clear evidence that the new government in Iraq is supporting the sectarian crisis? And by this way, such a government, we don't able to depend on to implement Baker's advices and to have a new Iraq, example of Iraq, a new example of democracy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we have been absolutely got by the time. And before I wind up, I really just want to try and tax our panel with well, you're very persistent. I'll take one more from you, and the microphone's coming your way. One more question, and then I have, unfortunately, and I'm sorry I did you out of one too, but there we are. No, here, this chap here.
Yes, my name is Araz Ziad from Kurdistan of Iraq. Actually, to add to Mrs. Bayan Abdurrahman's speech about the Syrian government, I find it an insult to the intelligence of the Kurdish people to ask for the ISG to ask the axis of evil, as they call them, to come and sort out things in Iraq. Now, the ISG went into Iraq and they never visited Kurdistan. They never talked to people. So my question is to Mr. David Johnson, is that we're talking about democracy here. And you go to Iraq and ask the Kurdish people, what do they want? ask the Shiites what they want. Now, I find it very difficult. You put yourself in my shoes to get somebody else to decide my future. In Britain, for example, when they had a couple of referendums in Wales, they didn't come in England and voted for it. They asked the Welsh people to vote for it. Do you want it or not? So is there any problem in going to Kurdistan and ask the people themselves rather than the...
But no one would ever dare ask the Kurds themselves, because you would become independent overnight.
Why not?
But because it would cause a complete disaster. Think of the Turks and the Syrians. The whole bang shooting match would go up. And you know that better than I do.
I do.
And that's why you have this beautiful and delicate balance, whereby you are completely independent, you have your own airport, you have everything, but we all say, thank you very much for being in Iraq.
Everybody, including the media, they are saying Iraq's unity is very important. Why is it so important? It was only created 80 years ago by the British and the West.
Right. Well, look, that may come out in the answers which I'm going to...
What others have got that the Kurds have not got in order to get a country of their own?
Okay, well, your question is in the air, and I'll see if anyone picks it up. But what I want to challenge the panel to do in one sentence each, that's all, it can be a very long sentence, but one sentence each, I'm literally going to ask them to throw out one thought that they think, either from the Baker Commission or that the Baker Commission ignored, that they think would make a profound difference to resolving Iraq. And I'm going to start with you, Richard.
Well, an American withdrawal would make a profound difference. I'm not sure it would make necessarily a good difference, but I think if it was handled, one sentence I know, if it was handled over a period of time, and if it was handled in a way that didn't just pull out from with a helicopter leaving the American embassy roof and the whole place imploding, maybe that's going to ultimately be the only solution for the country.
Ambassador.
I would like, as a final sentence, to urge Iraqis to achieve national reconciliation. This is extremely important, and set up a timetable with the Americans to leave Iraq as soon as possible. If the Iraqis have difficulties in having this conference, then Syria would be more than happy to host it. But it will only happen if the Iraqis really decide that. And in that case, we will be happy to help Iraqis to achieve the national reconciliation, including our brother, the Kurds.
Patrick.
I think that Iraq, in the future, you have to recognize in Iraq that Iraq is partly broken up already, that the Shia are the majority. They're not going to give up control of the government, but that needs to be restrained, that they don't dominate Iraq, that the Sunni know that they're not going to take back the government, but they're not going to be marginalized, they're not going to be driven out, they're not going to be slaughtered, and that the Kurds know that they have total security. At the moment they're riding high, would this end? Earlier people were denying that Iraq is that all these divisions existed. But leave aside the history. They do exist now, and I don't think you can have any form of stability in Iraq until you realize that these are the basic building blocks of Iraq in the future.
David.
A full implementation of the plan that was outlined by the President last night, with the full participation of the Iraqi forces that were outlined there, all 18 brigades, and an effective implementation of the reconstruction plan, fully funded for cash for work projects, as was quite eloquently recommended by one of your guests here tonight, holds the greatest possibility for a near-term set of progress in Iraq, which could lead to peace, period.
Ambassador.
Right, I've been sitting very pretty here, so I believe we should appreciate the realities that was created after 2003. We have a beautifully flourishing region in Iraqi Kurdistan. We have, like Patrick said, the dominance of the new coalition. However, I feel that a strong and democratic government is the only solution, and the return of a central authority. Our problem has been that the state of Iraq, as we knew it, had collapsed, and we have to create another democratic federal state that can hold the country together, at least for the foreseeable future, of course, unless the people decided otherwise.
Thank you, Ambassador, very much. Well, look, on your behalf, I'd really like to thank the panel extremely warmly. I mean, in fact, we've been treated to something which the world deserves to be treated to, which is that of engagement between people who disagree, and yet, most curiously, on occasion, state things upon which they are completely and utterly agreed. They just disagree with who said it. In that sense, I think it's been an uplifting occasion. I'd like to thank Richard, the Ambassador, David, and Patrick very, very warmly for coming. Above all, I'd like to thank